Did you know that the worst river accident that's ever happened in the whole of Australia's history happened in the middle of Brisbane? Yep, on the 13th of February 1896, a ferry called the Pearl capsized and sank right around here in floodwaters. But in order to give this story the justice it deserves, we need to start where all good yarns start, and that is at the beginning. However, we need to start 3 years prior at the Black February floods of 1893. See, the first of these floods washed away many bridges, including the Victoria Bridge in the middle of the city. So 3 years later, when this flood rolled around and the replacement bridge started to give way, the authorities thought it might wash away like the others did. So they closed it. However, they closed it in the middle of the night. So on Thursday the 13th of February 1896, when Brisbane woke up and went to work in the morning, they found that they couldn't cross the river. Not happy, Jan. Yep, the outcry was absolutely huge. To stop a riot from breaking out, a council alderman arranged a heap of ferries to carry people from Musgrave Wharf of South Brisbane to Queen's Wharf in Brisbane. And the Pearl was one of those ferries. Now, before we get into the nitty-gritty of the accident and how and why it was so bloody dreadful, I want to point out creepy fact number 1, and this story actually has heaps of creepy facts. Creepy fact number 1 is that the second Black February flood that happened 3 years prior happened on the same day as the Pearl accident. Now, initially, these ferries kept taking people from Musgrave Wharf to Queen's Wharf all day, but there was a problem. In fact, there were several. The first issue was that there were 2 ships impeding the ferry's way from Musgrave Wharf to Queen's Wharf. The 2 ships were the Normanby and the government steam yacht, the Lucinda. The second problem was that this was the only way to cross the river in the whole of Brisbane. And look, if this wasn't enough, the third issue was it was 5 o'clock in the bloody afternoon. So yeah, rush hour. So with so much traffic on both sides of the river, the captain of the Pearl, James Chard, figured that going around these ships would take too long. So he decided to go between them, and this is where the proverbial poo hit the fan. See, when crossing back towards Queen's Wharf, the Pearl was pushing against the current. And this was one of the factors that led the Pearl to hitting the anchor chains of the Lucinda. Now, according to Knowledge Hub, the Pearl sank in 30 seconds. 30 seconds! And look, this was a steamship, so when the boiler hit the water, guess what happened? It exploded and it cooked anyone who was near it. Now, according to the State Library of Queensland, there were between 29 and 57 people killed. Because this happened when and where it did, hundreds of people witnessed it, and the accounts of this time are absolutely heartbreaking. According to L.E Slaughter, people who witnessed it were moaning and sobbing and crying with grief. Others frantically tried to save their townsfolk who were drowning in the river. Another sad fact is, because this accident happened at rush hour at the only crossing on the river, nobody counted how many people boarded the Pearl. Whilst Captain Chard survived the accident, his account was very, very hard to believe. His story was that he essentially acted like a hero and directed people to safety. Furthermore, according to Paul Seto's book, Captain Chard claimed that the ferry was only half full, having 50 to 60 people on board. Moreover, he claimed that he went down with his ship and he felt the boat snap in two and his feet hit the bottom of the river, and then he clang onto a buoy and was rescued. He then changes his story and he says, no, I swam around and I looked for survivors and I saved heaps of people. Yeah, the tale kept changing. When police asked the other witnesses, the full horror came into view. One person said, there was 60 to 70 people on board at least. Yet another policeman was told, no, it was about 70 to 80. Yet others were saying, well, no, it was like 100 people on board this ferry. We have here a newspaper from the time where the Commissioner of Police begs the community to come forward with any information on who was on the Pearl. And this leads us on to creepy fact number 2, and that's that police had no idea how many bodies they needed to find. But by gum, did they start finding bodies all over the place. Of the 46 people who survived this accident, quite a lot of them had lost children, spouses, or some of them were with friends at the time, or saw people on the ferry that they knew. Because they came forward, this leads on to a list of who some of the dead were. That being said, there are a number who were never identified. Sadly, this leads on to another problem, and that's that the current was moving about 4 to 5 knots, which is a bit over 9 kilometres an hour. This meant that bodies were pushed out all over the city and out into the bay. Now, I do not wish to come across as disrespectful towards the dead. However, this next part affected Brisbane in a visceral fashion, so it's important to this story. These bodies kept being found often near where people lived, such as a body of a man that was found at Kangaroo Point, or the decomposing bodies that were found near Breakfast Creek by a small boy. Yet 3 more decaying bodies washed up near the Hamilton Hotel, and only one of them was identifiable. Another young lad found another very decomposed body at Eagle Farm. 2 more were found at the mouth of the river, and only one could be identified. Another corpse washed up at Redcliffe 5 days later. Redcliffe is way over here for those not from Brisbane. Another one washed up at Bribie Island, which is way over here for those that don't know. The newspaper gives all sorts of gory details and says all her hair had fallen out and she was so rotten no one could work out who she was. Sadly, she was like so many others who made the newspapers of this time, but were never ever identified. To add further trauma, the wreck of the Pearl was found about a month later and she was raised from the bottom of the river. The whole top had been ripped off and she was in a terrible shape. Now, the Pearl was actually a very well-known boat, so seeing her in such a state, coupled with all the bodies of fellow townspeople washing up in strange places, led to more and more Brisbane people to call for Captain Charge to be tried for murder. He stood trial, however it must have been rigged because all that happened was he lost his licence to drive ships, and beyond that, all charges were dropped. But according to South Brisbane Cemetery, he apparently got it back again as he ended up working for the Australasian United Steam Navigation Company. To add insult to injury, this new job was just around the corner to where the accident actually happened. Now, when everything was said and done, the aftermath was that 14 of the known bodies were never ever found. But given we don't actually know how many people were on this ferry, the number is actually probably higher. And given this area had less people in it, animals would have scavenged these bodies, and that would have meant that the corpses would have been moved all over the place. This leads us to creepy fact number 3, and that is that there are probably still bodies hidden around Brisbane from this accident that are still waiting to be found. The last body to be found was located on Mud Island a year later, which is a really bad place to find bodies if you saw last week's video. Anyway, now that you know the whole rotten saga, I wanted to finish this video where it began and show you exactly where in Brisbane all this happened in the present day. Do you see how Queen's Wharf is sort of in alignment with Charlotte Street? So according to my map, it's about there. That's where Queen's Wharf used to be. So that means that Musgrave Wharf must have been along here. I'll go and find it. Furthermore, do you see how Glenelg Street runs in alignment with this section of Musgrave Wharf? That means that where I'm standing, that means that over there was Queen's Wharf. So the Pearl was probably crossing from here to here. That means that this, around here, would be where Musgrave Wharf was. This means that this is about where the Pearl capsized and sank, which I think is really sad. Anyway, if you've learnt something new, please like and subscribe and press the bell notification. Cheers! Thanks.